Media Monitoring Africa is approaching, in fact, wants the Constitutional Court to declare that President Cyril Ramaphosa failed to fulfill his duty by delaying the appointment of the SABC board. The media watchdog is going ahead with the court application despite Ramaphosa's appointment of the board last week, saying this would prevent similar violations in the future. Ramaphosa says the delay was due to him wanting to ensure he complied with constitutional obligations. William Bird is with Media Monitoring Africa and joins us now to give us some context into this court application. William, thank you for making time for us this afternoon. So the president says, I've appointed the board, so this application is now moot. Why have you then, as Media Monitoring Africa, decided to still press ahead with your court action?
Good afternoon. Well, we took the case because initially, despite several requests to the presidency, we weren't given any answers as to why there was a delay. It was only when we got the court papers that the arguments that the president is using were put forward. So we had no choice but to go to court. And then the president raised some really interesting ideas and arguments in his responses. We obviously don't agree with those in terms of his powers and appointing the board. So we launched that in February, and it took him another 4 months effectively to appoint the board. Now, there are key legal arguments that need to be made, and there are important issues that we're saying we don't want this kind of thing to ever happen again. And there needs to be a level of accountability. You know, you can't just say, oh, well, the board, it took Parliament and the President 6 months to appoint the board. So what? No matter. There has to be consequences. So our application to the Constitutional Court was made on two bases. The first was appoint the board. The President has now done that, so that is no longer there. But what is still there is that we want an order declaring that the President hasn't acted diligently and without delay. He, in fact, delayed significantly in our view. And we want the court to rule on that.
Yeah. And in court papers, he says this delay was not meant to avoid his constitutional obligations, but it more reflected his attempt to ensure that he complied with them. But how he acted by sending the list back to Parliament suggested he doesn't really understand his constitutional obligations.
So, and that's really the crux of it. And so there are really important constitutional issues here. You know, we say that the president, when Parliament said, here's the list, appoint them, the president should just have said, okay. If he had a concern, he should have done what every other South African is empowered to do, which is he would have appointed them and then gone and taken Parliament's process on legal review, or he could have said to them, I'm taking on legal review once he'd appointed them. But merely by going back, asking them to saying, oh, we need to clarify this, and what does this mean, and bearing in mind, he appointed 11 of the 12. There would have been the 12 if he had appointed them in December when he had the opportunity to do so. He didn't. And so there are these issues around power, where his power lies, what Parliament's role in this is, and what he's done. And those questions need to be answered. By letting this case fall away, it would mean that those questions don't get answered, and potentially the next time there's another board that needs to be appointed, he could delay again. Yeah.
So whatever finding is made may help, I suppose, deter future violations and maybe even provide some clarity that the presidency may need on what the Constitution says when it comes to such appointments. What relief are you seeking as Media Monitoring Africa? Do you want a declaratory order?
Yeah, that's all we're asking for. We want a declaratory order. In other words, the Constitutional Court looks at it, they hear the arguments, and they say, yes, we agree with Media Monitoring Africa. The president didn't act diligently and without delay. He failed in this particular regard. And that may have whatever political consequences, but legal consequences, that's where it ends. It means that if and when there's another president, and they attempt to do something similar, they'll see, oh, they can't do that because there's already a clearly outlined, defined process that there's no wiggle room in, and it means we can't have a repeat, at least on the president's side, of this kind of thing again. There's still a range of questions that arise in relation to Parliament, but you know we'll get there. They're on our radar.
Yeah, it seems some people don't appreciate the consequences of such delays, and maybe you can help us understand what the implications of delaying a decision like this are, of a president failing to fulfill his obligations timeously in the context of the SABC?
So it's meant a number of things. You know, the SABC's already precarious financial position is now almost certainly even more precarious, if not entirely catastrophic. It means that the SABC is now in breach of the Public Finance Management Act because they weren't able to comply with a range of parliamentary and other processes in terms of reporting, in terms of the year end. It means that all of the other issues that they should have been dealing with over the last 6 months, they haven't been able to deal with. It means that when they go in and have their first meeting, one of their first orders of business, aside from getting a handover from some of their senior executives, is going to be to immediately advertise for 2 senior executive posts, because 2 of those people are leaving at the end of June. So it puts them under an incredible amount of pressure. It's put the SABC's sustainability under an incredible amount of pressure. It's put the people, the senior executive teams, really in unfortunate positions. You know, they were grilled and attacked in Parliament as if this was a delay of their making, when in fact they had nothing to do with this at all. If anyone's going to be angry, it should be the people, angry at Parliament and angry at the President, because all of the delays and the things, the contracts that they couldn't sign, the potential for new deals that they couldn't then go after and chase, the issues around the analog switch off. You know, the minister said they were going to consult with people. They said they consulted. The former minister said she consulted with everyone, including the SABC. Impossible to have done so because it had no board. So that process, so it has a consequence within the SABC and outside of the SABC, and of course to the broader media environment, because what you find in countries where you have a strong, stable, independent public broadcaster, it positively impacts the sustainability of all of the media. So you can bet that this has had a negative consequence on other media, but we may not see that until a few months or even a few years down the line.
Yeah, and now you have a board that's coming in that has to rush against time and hit the ground running, because there's so much that still needs to be done. Some contracts, as you've indicated previously, of some in the executives are expiring. So there's a lot that now actually needs to be done, and there's a lot of pressure on them now as they come in.
I mean, you can imagine if you left Eskom to run without a board, you know, at the moment, maybe they're not the best example, but you can imagine if you left any big entity alone without a board for 6 months, all the kinds of things, the small things that then build into bigger things that then have longer lasting consequences. You know, the impact of this on the people working at the SABC has been extremely negative, destabilizing, you know, in terms of, well, what's going to happen when the new board comes in? Are there going to have to be more retrenchments now because the financial position is even more precarious? You know, how are they going to go about reasserting the independence of the SABC? And they've then got to be saying, we need to operate as a public broadcaster in a digital environment. We need a far better funding model, and we've got to prepare for elections.
Yeah. William Bett, thank you so much for making time for us this afternoon.